He stood in the doorway like a storm that had learned how to wear a man's shape. Dust clung to his boots, to the hem of his worn jeans, to the lines of his face that looked carved by wind and regret. The sun was sinking behind the hills, throwing fire across the ranch, and for a moment it felt as if the whole world was holding its breath. "You can't handle a man like me," he growled. His voice was low, rough, not loud, dangerous in the way quiet thunder is dangerous. She looked up at him, took in the breadth of his shoulders, the scars he never talked about, the sadness he thought no one could see. Then she smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a teasing one. A calm, steady smile, like she'd already decided something important. Without saying a word, she reached out, wrapped her fingers around the edge of the door, and closed it. The sound echoed through the house like a promise. Ethan Cole had learned early that warnings were easier than explanations. It was simpler to let people believe he was too rough, too broken, too dangerous to love. It saved time. It saved pain. Mostly, it saved him from hoping. The ranch sat miles away from the nearest town, stretched wide beneath a sky that never stopped watching. His days were long, his nights longer. He worked until his muscles burned, until exhaustion dulled the memories he didn't want to face. People in town talked. They said Ethan Cole was cold, that he drank too much and smiled too little. That something bad had happened to him years ago, something that made his eyes look older than they should have. They weren't wrong, but they didn't know the whole truth. He'd loved once, deeply, foolishly, trusted the wrong people, lost more than he cared to remember. Since then, he'd built walls higher than his barn and thicker than his silence. And they worked, until her. Lila Bennett arrived on the ranch with a single suitcase and a past she refused to let define her. She wasn't running away, at least that's what she told herself. But she needed space, needed quiet, needed a place where no one knew her story well enough to pity her. Her aunt had owned the small guest house on Ethan's land years ago, before illness took her away. When Lila inherited it, the ranch came with the paperwork, and Ethan came with the warning. "He's not easy," the lawyer had said gently. "He keeps to himself, doesn't like change." Lila had nodded, thanked him, and come anyway. Because after everything she'd been through, not easy didn't scare her. Loneliness did. Their first meeting had been brief and explosive. Ethan had found her unloading boxes, sweat on her brow, determination in her stance. "You lost?" he'd asked flatly. She'd turned, brushed hair from her face, and smiled like the sun didn't intimidate her. "Nope, I live here now." That had been the first crack in his composure. He'd told her about the rules, the boundaries, the distance he preferred. She'd listened, really listened, then thanked him, and ignored most of it. Not out of defiance, but because she saw something he didn't realize he was showing. Pain. Days turned into weeks. They crossed paths in silences that grew heavier, then strangely comfortable. Conversations started small, weather, repairs, animals, but slowly drifted toward things that mattered. She noticed how he always fixed things for her before she asked. He noticed how she sang softly when she thought no one could hear. Neither said thank you. Neither said what they were starting to feel. The tension lived in glances held too long, in hands that almost brushed, in words swallowed at the last second. Ethan told himself it was temporary. Lila told herself it was dangerous. Both were right. The storm came without warning. Rain lashed the land, thunder splitting the sky, wind howling like it had a grudge. Lila's power went out just as night swallowed the ranch whole. She tried to stay calm. She failed. When the knock came, she nearly cried with relief. Ethan stood there, soaked, eyes sharp with concern he hadn't bothered to hide. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, then shook her head, then laughed softly at herself. "I think so, just dark." He stepped inside without waiting for permission, checking windows, the generator, the roof, protective instinct written into every movement. When he finally turned to her, candlelight caught his face in gold and shadow. "You should have called. I didn't want to bother you." His jaw tightened. "You won't," he said quietly. Something shifted then, something fragile and frightening. They stood too close. The storm roared outside, but the louder storm was between them. Ethan felt it, the pull, the risk, the old fear clawing up his spine. He took a step back, hands curling into fists. "You need to understand something," he said, voice rough. "I'm not easy. I don't do gentle. I don't promise forever." She searched his face, really looked at him. "I'm not asking for promises." "That's not what I mean." His eyes darkened. "You can't handle a man like me." The words were meant to protect her. They sounded like a challenge. Lila didn't answer right away. She stepped forward instead, reached past him, and closed the door. The storm was locked outside. "I've handled worse than you," she said softly. "But I think you're not as scary as you pretend." His breath hitched. "You don't know me." "I know enough," she whispered. "And I want the rest." The silence between them stretched, trembling. He should have walked away. He didn't. What followed wasn't rushed. It was careful, intense, emotional. They talked until the candles burned low, about loss, fear, mistakes, and the things they were ashamed to want. Ethan admitted he was afraid of hurting her. Lila admitted she was afraid of being left. They didn't fix each other. They chose each other anyway. Their connection grew in stolen mornings and shared sunsets, in arguments that ended in understanding, in silence that felt like home instead of distance. Ethan learned how to soften without feeling weak. Lila learned how to stand her ground without apologizing. The ranch changed. So did they. Months later, someone in town asked Ethan how he'd managed to tame the wild woman who'd moved onto his land. Ethan smiled, a real smile this time. "She didn't tame me," he said. "She trusted me." And that had changed everything. On quiet nights, when the world felt too big, Lila would rest her head against his chest and listen to his heartbeat, steady, strong, alive. Sometimes he'd murmur, half asleep, "You sure you can handle me?" She'd smile into the darkness. "I closed the door," she'd whisper. "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in his life, he believed it.